I still remember the way the restaurant lights shimmered against the glass that night, warm, golden, and soft enough to make everything look better than it really was. It was the kind of place my wife loved. The kind with velvet chairs, quiet jazz in the background, and candles flickering in crystal holders. She said it felt like a dream there. I thought dreams were supposed to feel safe. That night, they didn't. I wasn't supposed to be there yet. The plan was simple. She would get there first, as she always did. She loved making an entrance, letting her perfume linger before I even arrived. But traffic had been lighter than expected, and for once, I was early. I remember smiling at the thought. Finally, I'd surprise her for a change. After all, it was our anniversary. 7 years married, 10 years together. But the universe has a cruel sense of timing. When I walked in, the host recognized me. He smiled the kind of polite smile people wear when they think they know your story. He said my wife had already arrived, sitting in our usual booth, the one by the partition near the window. I almost said something like, "Perfect, she's early," but something stopped me. A quiet, strange feeling in my chest. I don't know if it was instinct, or just years of ignoring that faint whisper inside me that always said pay attention. So instead of walking straight to her, I hesitated. The partition was tall, carved wood with open spaces you could see through if you leaned the right way. I took a slow step, careful not to make a sound on the polished floor. And from behind that partition, from behind that thin veil between what I thought I knew and what I was about to learn, I heard her. Her voice, soft, playful, the tone she used to use with me in the beginning. And then I heard a man's laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't careless. It was the kind of laugh that came from someone comfortable, too comfortable. That moment lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it changed everything that came after. I didn't step out. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I just stood there, staring through the thin gaps of the wood, and saw the life I thought I had, the one I had built with her, begin to quietly come apart. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name's Daniel. I'm 36. I work in architecture, the kind of work where you spend half your life imagining what a place could look like and the other half convincing people it's worth building. I met my wife, Elise, in college. She was an art student, all color and chaos, while I was the guy who thought straight lines and rules could save the world. We made sense together. Or at least, we used to. The first few years were beautiful in a way I didn't know how to appreciate back then. She painted, I designed. We built a tiny apartment filled with too many plants and not enough space. Every corner of that place had her touch. Splashes of color, half-finished sketches, and notes she left me before work. She used to write things like, "Don't forget you're loved," on scraps of paper and stick them in my coat pocket. Somewhere along the way, life started moving faster. I got promotions. We bought a house. Her art studio grew from a dream to a business. We stopped leaving notes. We stopped having time. It wasn't that we stopped loving each other. At least I didn't think we had. It was more like we drifted into this quiet, polite rhythm. We still went out for dinners, still posted pictures smiling at the camera, still said, "I love you" before bed. But sometimes, when she turned over in her sleep, I could feel the distance in the way her hand didn't reach for mine anymore. I told myself that's what marriage was. Two people learning to coexist even when the spark fades. But lately, she'd been different. Started with her phone. The way she'd glance at it and turn it over when I walked into the room. The way her smile lingered a little too long after reading a message. I'd ask who it was, and she'd tell me it was a friend from the art collective. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband checking her phone. So I'd just nod and pretend not to notice. Then came the nights she worked late at the studio. I'd call, and she'd say she was finishing up a client commission. Her voice would sound tired, distracted. Sometimes I'd offer to pick her up, but she'd decline, saying she needed the drive home to clear her head. There was one night, maybe 2 weeks before our anniversary, when I woke up at 2 a.m. and realized she still wasn't home. I called, no answer. 15 minutes later, she walked in, smelling faintly of wine and rain. She said she lost track of time. I believed her, because I wanted to, because believing the lie felt easier than facing the truth I was too afraid to imagine. The morning of our anniversary, I woke up early. She was already dressed, already halfway out the door. She said she had to run to the studio to meet a supplier. She kissed my cheek, not my lips, and told me she'd meet me at the restaurant at 7. I remember watching her walk away, sunlight catching in her hair, and feeling like I didn't know her anymore. Still, I told myself tonight would be different. I made reservations at her favorite place, the same restaurant where I'd proposed to her years ago. I even asked the chef to prepare her favorite dessert, the one she'd gushed about on our first date. I wanted it to mean something. I wanted us to find our way back to the beginning. But beginnings have a way of showing you how far you've drifted. I got to the restaurant at 6:40. The sky outside was painted in shades of violet and gold, the city humming softly with the kind of calm that only exists between day and night. When I stepped inside, the warmth hit me. The smell of roasted herbs, the low hum of conversations, the soft clinking of glasses. That's when the host told me she'd already arrived. And that's when I heard her voice, light, melodic, the one that used to make me forget how heavy life could feel. But this time it wasn't for me. Through the partition, I could see just enough. Her silhouette leaning forward, her hand brushing against someone else's. The way she laughed, that little tilt of her head she did when she was completely present with someone. I hadn't seen her do that with me in months. The man sitting across from her looked familiar, tall, dark hair, sharp features. I'd seen him once, I realized, when I picked her up from her studio. He was one of her new clients. At least that's what she'd said. My stomach tightened as I watched her reach for his hand. And for a moment, the world around me went quiet. The sound of the restaurant faded. The laughter, the music, the movement. All of it disappeared, replaced by the deafening sound of my heartbeat. I wasn't angry yet, not even hurt, just still, like my body hadn't caught up to what my mind already knew. She smiled at him, the smile I used to live for, the smile I built my life around. And then, she whispered something that made him laugh again. I didn't need to hear the words. The way she looked at him said enough. I took a step back, careful not to make a sound. My hands trembled slightly, but I shoved them in my pockets to hide it. The host was still nearby, looking at me expectantly, waiting to escort me to my table. I told him I needed a moment. My voice didn't sound like mine. I walked to the restroom instead. The mirror there caught me off guard. I looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. My eyes were tired, my jaw tight. I splashed water on my face and stared at the reflection, searching for the version of me who believed we were happy. He was gone. That's when I realized something painful. It wasn't just her betrayal that hurt. It was how easily she had moved on in that booth, as if the years we'd spent together were just chapters she could close without consequence. I stayed in that restroom longer than I should have, trying to breathe through the storm building in my chest. When I finally stepped out, I didn't go to the table. I didn't confront her. I just walked quietly toward the back exit, the cold evening air wrapping around me like the truth I could no longer ignore. Behind me, the restaurant lights glowed softly through the windows. I could see her silhouette still laughing, still unaware that the life she shared with me had just cracked wide open. I stood there for a while, under the flickering streetlight, feeling the weight of every memory pressing down on me. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just let silence do what words never could. Tell me everything I needed to know. And as I turned away, walking into the empty street, a single thought echoed in my mind. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and old, like instinct. Sometimes, the moment you stop believing someone loves you isn't when they say goodbye. It's when you realize they already did, long before you arrived. The days after that night blurred together like smudged ink on a letter I couldn't bring myself to read. I didn't confront her. I didn't even mention the restaurant. Instead, I went through the motions. Work, calls, emails. All while carrying the weight of what I'd seen like an invisible wound no one else could notice. Elise came home late that same night, long after I'd left the restaurant. She slipped quietly into bed beside me, smelling faintly of perfume and wine, like nothing had happened. Her breathing steadied within minutes, soft and rhythmic. I lay there awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the space between us. A distance so wide it felt like a canyon. That was when the silence began to change. Before, our silence had been comfortable, the kind that comes when you know someone so well that words become unnecessary. But now it was heavy, deliberate, like she was measuring every breath she took beside me. And I was measuring mine. I started noticing little things that had probably been there for months but I was too blind or too trusting to see. She'd get dressed with more care. Even on days she said she was just heading to the studio. She started wearing perfume again. Not the one I bought her, the one she said made her smell too grown up. This new one was softer, unfamiliar. The kind of scent that wasn't meant to be shared but discovered. She also started humming again. Elise never hummed when she was with me anymore. But lately, she'd walk through the hallway, half smiling at some tune I didn't recognize. It was strange. She looked lighter, happier. And the cruelest part was that her happiness made me miserable. One evening, I came home early from work. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but the lights in her studio were on. Out of habit, I walked over. I used to do that often, bringing her coffee or snacks when she was painting late. The front door was slightly open, the faint sound of music spilling out. For a moment, I almost knocked, but something stopped me again. That same stillness. From the window, I could see her, not painting, not working, just sitting there on the couch, smiling at her phone. She looked radiant in that dim light, the way her hair caught the golden hue of the lamp beside her. And she laughed, the same soft laugh I'd heard behind the partition. I turned away before I could see more. The air outside felt colder than it should have. My chest tightened as I walked back to the house, feeling every memory of her. Every morning kiss, every shared coffee, every whispered promise. Press against my ribs like thorns. That night, she came home an hour later. She said traffic was bad. I just nodded. We ate dinner together, her telling stories about her clients, me pretending to listen. She smiled between bites, eyes bright, gestures soft. And I wondered if she noticed how quiet I'd become. Or maybe she did notice, and that silence was exactly what she wanted. It's a strange kind of pain. Loving someone who's already halfway gone. You start to live in this twilight space between what's real and what's memory. You remember the way she used to look at you, the way her hand would find yours unconsciously, and you start to doubt your own perception. Was it ever real? Or did you just imagine it all because you needed it to be true? Every night, I'd lie awake next to her, watching the moonlight stretch across her skin. She looked peaceful, and I hated that I still found her beautiful. One morning, I watched her get dressed. She moved with a quiet precision, choosing a dress I hadn't seen before. She checked herself in the mirror, applying lipstick carefully, a shade too bold for a normal workday. She caught my reflection watching her. For a moment, our eyes met. She smiled, said she had a meeting. I wanted to ask who it was with. I wanted to say I knew, but the words felt too heavy to carry out loud. Instead, I just said to drive safe. And she did what she always did, kissed my cheek, not my lips. When the door closed behind her, the house felt different, quieter, like even the air had learned not to expect her anymore. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't break you all at once. It's slow. It seeps in through the cracks of your everyday life until it becomes part of your routine. I started drinking more coffee just to fill the time. Stayed late at work, not because I needed to, but because being home felt like standing in a museum of what used to be us. Her art hung on every wall. All color, life, expression. And I couldn't look at it without feeling like she'd painted every piece for someone else now. Sometimes, when I walked past the living room, I'd catch her sitting on the couch, smiling at her phone again. She'd glance up and lock it quickly, pretending to check the time or scroll through messages. I never said anything. I just nodded, poured myself another drink, and went upstairs. It was becoming a pattern, her secrets, my silence. A few nights later, I found her sketchbook lying open on her desk. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity isn't something you can reason with when your heart's already drowning. There were sketches of a man, not perfect portraits, just fragments. A jawline, a hand, eyes half hidden in shadow. But I recognized him, the same man from the restaurant. The same one who had laughed at something she said like he'd known her forever. I closed the sketchbook quietly and sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. For the first time, anger started to flicker somewhere deep inside me. Not loud, not wild, just a quiet burn that refused to go out. That night, I slept in the guest room. She didn't ask why. I started to pull away in small, deliberate ways. I stopped calling to check on her. Stopped waiting up when she said she'd be late. I began focusing on things that didn't involve her. My projects, late gym sessions, long drives with no destination. I wanted to see how long it would take for her to notice the shift. Took a week. One night, she came into the guest room. She stood by the doorway, quiet. The soft light from the hall cast her shadow against the floor. She asked if everything was okay. Her voice was calm, but her eyes searched mine. I told her I'd been tired. That work was overwhelming. She nodded, hesitating for a moment before walking away. The thing is, she didn't ask again. And that told me everything I needed to know. By the time our anniversary week came to an end, I had already decided what I needed to do. Not revenge. Not confrontation. Just truth. I wanted to see her world as it really was. Not through the stories she told me, but through the moments she thought I'd never witness. I wanted to know who she was when I wasn't around. So I started paying attention. I memorized the times she left, the way her voice changed when she spoke to certain clients. I noted the way she always came home just a little too happy, her laughter softer, her eyes distracted. The truth, I realized, doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it slips quietly into your awareness, until denial is no longer possible. A few days later, she told me she had another late meeting. I nodded, told her to take care. But this time I followed her. Not far, just far enough to see. She drove to the same restaurant, parked in the same spot. I stayed across the street, the rain blurring the windshield, making the lights of the city smear into streaks of gold. And there he was again, waiting for her inside. She greeted him the way she used to greet me. Soft smile, gentle touch. It didn't look like guilt. It looked like love. That was the part that hurt most. Because it wasn't just betrayal. It was replacement. When she came home later that night, she found me sitting in the dark. She didn't notice the look in my eyes. Didn't notice the silence pressing between us like a wall. She just said she was tired and disappeared into the shower. I sat there on the couch for a long time, staring at the door she had just closed. That was the moment I realized something I hadn't before. She wasn't lying to me because she was afraid to hurt me. She was lying because she no longer cared if she did. And that kind of indifference, that's colder than betrayal itself. The next morning I left early. I didn't tell her where I was going. I just needed air, space, distance. But all day her voice stayed in my head. The laugh, the tone, the way she leaned in close behind that partition. I couldn't unsee it, couldn't unhear it. And yet, a small part of me still wanted to understand why. Because love, real love, doesn't vanish overnight. It dies slowly, and you keep reaching for its ghost long after it's gone. That weekend, I decided to test something. I told her I'd be out of town for work. A short trip. 3 days. She seemed relieved. Not sad. Not worried. Just lighter. So I packed a bag. Drove out of the driveway. And then I parked around the corner. The house stayed dark for an hour. Then her car pulled out. And I followed. Where she went that night and what I saw changed everything I thought I knew about love, about loyalty, about her. It was the moment I stopped hoping. The moment the truth stopped hiding. When you prepare yourself for heartbreak, you imagine it will feel like fire, hot, violent, uncontrollable. But when it finally arrives, it doesn't burn. It freezes. That night, sitting behind the wheel of my car, I felt the kind of stillness that only comes before something breaks. It was raining. One of those soft, endless drizzles that blur the world into motionless light. Elisa's car cut through the mist, taillights glowing red like distant warnings. I followed at a distance, every turn of her tires dragging me deeper into the truth I didn't want but needed to face. She wasn't going to the studio. Not this late. Not dressed like that. I drove slower as she turned into a small side street I didn't recognize. Quiet, tucked away, the kind of street you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. The kind of place made for secrets. Her car stopped in front of an apartment building. Not fancy, but neat. Curtains drawn, one window glowing faintly yellow. She stepped out, checked her reflection in the car window, and fixed her hair. That small, instinctive gesture broke something in me. I'd seen her do that 1,000 times before dinner with me, before date nights, before walking into the restaurant where I first told her I loved her. It used to be for me. Now it was for someone else. She looked around briefly, then buzzed the intercom. Seconds later, the door clicked open, and she disappeared inside. I just sat there, watching, waiting, hoping absurdly that she'd come back out, that maybe she'd forgotten something, or changed her mind, or realized how wrong this was. But the minutes turned into an hour, then 2, and the rain kept falling. The things you notice in moments like that. The rhythm of the wipers, the faint hum of a passing car, the way the city lights reflected on the wet asphalt, shimmering like memories that refused to fade. I kept my eyes on that one glowing window. At one point, a shadow crossed it, 2 figures close together. I couldn't see faces, but I didn't need to. I knew the shape of her movements, the tilt of her head, the way she leaned in when she was laughing. My chest tightened, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I told myself to leave, to drive away, to stop punishing myself. But I couldn't, because I needed to see it. I needed to bury every last piece of denial with proof so clear that even love couldn't argue with it. So I waited. Hours passed before the front door opened again. Elise stepped out, coat pulled close around her shoulders, hair slightly messy from the rain, or maybe not the rain. She glanced around before heading back to her car. Her face was calm, peaceful even. That peace, that's what hurt most. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't ashamed. She was simply done. And I realized that what I'd seen wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a choice, a routine, a second life she'd been living, and I was just a background character in it. I didn't follow her home that night. I drove somewhere else instead, the pier. The one we used to visit when we were still figuring each other out. Back then, she'd paint the water, and I'd sketch lines of the horizon for her, pretending I could draw. We used to talk about everything there. Dreams, fears, plans for a future that now felt like fiction. The pier was quiet, the sea dark and endless. I sat there in the car, the cold seeping into my bones, and replayed every moment of our marriage like a movie in reverse. Every anniversary, every kiss, every night she said she loved me. How many of those had already been lies? I wanted to be angry. I wanted to smash the dashboard, scream her name, demand answers. But I couldn't find the strength. Because somewhere deep down, I already knew the answers. She hadn't fallen out of love overnight. She'd been slipping away for months. Maybe years, while I was too busy believing that stability meant happiness. Maybe I stopped being someone she looked at and started being someone she lived beside. Maybe she stopped needing me long before I realized I was losing her. And maybe I stopped really seeing her too. That thought cut deeper than anything else. I went home just before dawn. Her car was already in the driveway. Lights off, curtains drawn. Inside, the house smelled faintly of her perfume. That same new scent, light, flowery. Nothing like the one I'd once loved. I walked past the living room, past the kitchen, into our bedroom. She was asleep, peaceful. Her arms stretched across the empty space where I should have been. I stood there, watching her for a moment. It's a cruel kind of beauty, seeing the person who's destroyed you look so untouched by the wreckage. I wanted to wake her, to tell her I knew, to watch her eyes and see if she'd even try to lie. But something inside me stopped. Because suddenly, I realized confrontation wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't bring back what was already gone. All it would do was give her the chance to justify it, to twist it into something smaller, less brutal. And I couldn't bear to let her rewrite the truth I'd seen with my own eyes. So I turned away. That night, I slept in the guest room again. The sheets were cold, unfamiliar, but they were honest. Over the next few days, she pretended nothing had changed. She smiled in the mornings, sent me short texts during the day, kissed my cheek before leaving for her meetings, and I played along, calm, controlled, watching. It's incredible how easy pretending can become once you know you're not the only one doing it. But I was planning something. Not revenge. Not the loud kind, at least. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want shouting or broken dishes. I wanted clarity, closure. I wanted to see what she would do if the roles reversed. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A few days later, she told me she had another late client dinner. She wore that same shade of lipstick, the one she only used for him. I nodded, told her to have a good night. An hour later, I drove back to the same restaurant. Same golden lights, same soft jazz, same Partition. And when I stepped inside, it felt like stepping back into the moment where everything began to unravel. I told the host I'd wait for someone. He smiled politely and led me to a small corner table, not too far from the Partition where she usually sat. From there I could see her. She was already there, sitting across from him again. Same man, same gestures, same warmth. I didn't hide this time. I didn't sneak glances through the wooden carvings. I watched them openly, from the shadows. She leaned closer, smiling, whispering something that made him laugh. Their hands brushed, then stayed. It wasn't lust. It wasn't guilt. It was something far worse, comfort. They looked like two people who knew each other's rhythms, who'd shared stories, laughter, maybe even love. And that's when I understood. She wasn't cheating because she was lost. She was cheating because she'd already found someone else. Someone who made her feel alive again. Someone who wasn't me. I left before they saw me. The night air felt heavier this time. Every breath scraped against my chest. When I got home, the house felt smaller, colder. Every photograph on the wall suddenly looked staged. Two people smiling for a version of themselves that no longer existed. I walked into the living room and stared at one photo in particular. Us at the beach the day after our wedding. Her hair was tangled from the wind, her eyes bright, her hand resting on my chest. She used to look at me like I was home. Now I was just another place she wanted to leave. That night, I poured myself a drink, sat in the dark. I thought about calling her, about telling her I knew that it was over. But I couldn't, not yet, because there was one last thing I needed to understand, not about her but about me. How do you let go of someone who still feels like the center of your world, even when they've already built a new one without you? How do you stop loving someone who's made a home inside your memories? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I would soon, because the next time she walked through that door, I wasn't going to be the man she left behind. I was going to be the man who finally saw her clearly, without the fog of love, without denial, without the illusions that made it all bearable. The man who would quietly end it all. The morning after I saw her with him again, everything felt painfully ordinary. The sunlight streamed through the curtains like it always did. The coffee machine hissed, the smell of toast filled the kitchen, and Elise moved around the room with her usual quiet grace, humming under her breath, hair still wet from her shower. She looked peaceful, effortlessly so, and I realized that peace wasn't shared anymore. It belonged entirely to her. I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to read the newspaper while my thoughts played in silence behind my eyes. Each word I looked at blurred into the same sentence. She doesn't love you anymore. She asked if I wanted more coffee. I nodded. My voice didn't trust itself to speak. When she set the cup in front of me, her hand brushed mine. Light, casual, the way it used to mean something. But this time it was empty. Just movement. Just habit. She smiled faintly, unaware that I was studying her every detail. The tone in her voice, the softness in her gaze. The same expressions that once belonged to us now felt borrowed. I'd spent weeks drowning in disbelief, waiting for anger to come like thunder. But it didn't. Instead, there was calm. A cold, deliberate kind of calm that didn't come from peace but from exhaustion. I'd reached that quiet place where heartbreak stops screaming and starts whispering. And that's where I found my clarity. That evening, while she was in the shower, I went into her studio. Everything looked the same. The canvases stacked neatly against the wall, the scent of turpentine still sharp in the air. But the sketchbook on her desk was new. The cover was darker, worn at the edges, as if it had already been opened 100 times. I knew what I would find inside. And yet, when I turned the pages, it still felt like being hit by something heavy and unseen. Sketches. Dozens of them. All of him. Not abstract, not subtle, detailed. Personal. Each one traced with the kind of tenderness she hadn't given me in years. There was one that stopped me cold. It was of her and him, their hands intertwined. The lines were soft, delicate, almost reverent. She had drawn herself smiling. I couldn't remember the last time she'd drawn me smiling beside her. I sat there for a long time, staring at that page, feeling every part of me go still. Then, I closed the sketchbook and placed it exactly where I'd found it, because I didn't want her to know I'd seen it. Not yet. The next few days I became someone else. Someone deliberate, detached, composed. I woke before her. I made breakfast. I left for work early and came home late. When she texted, I replied with short, polite answers. She noticed, of course. She asked if I was okay, if something was wrong. I told her I was just tired. She believed me, or maybe she wanted to. It's funny. Once someone starts lying to you, they become blind to the lies coming back at them. So I built a wall of silence around myself, brick by brick. Not out of vengeance, out of preservation. I stopped looking at her the way I used to, stopped offering her the comfort of my trust, stopped giving her the parts of me she'd already replaced. But I didn't tell her that I knew. Not yet, because I wanted her to feel what I had felt. The uncertainty, the unease, the slow unraveling of something once solid. And so I waited. One night, she told me she'd be working late again. I nodded, pretending to be half asleep. When the door closed behind her, I stayed still for a few minutes, listening to her footsteps fade. Then, I got up and quietly began packing. Not everything, just enough. A suitcase, some clothes, documents, essentials. I wasn't running. I was leaving. There's a difference. Running means fear. Leaving means clarity. I packed slowly, deliberately, every fold of fabric a goodbye I would never speak aloud. Before I zipped the suitcase, I walked into the living room and stared at our framed wedding photo. We looked young there, wild with hope, drunk on promises. I remembered how my hands had shaken when I slipped the ring on her finger. I remembered how she cried during the vows. She said I was her home. I gently turned the frame face down. Some things don't deserve to keep watching. The next day I called in sick. Told work I needed time off. Then I drove back to the restaurant, the same one where it had all started. I didn't go inside this time. I just sat across the street, looking through the windows. It was empty, quiet, the afternoon sunlight glinting off the silverware. That place used to mean something. It was where I proposed to her, where we celebrated every milestone, where I thought love lived. But love had left long before we noticed. And I finally understood that what I had witnessed behind that partition wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the moment the end revealed itself. The truth had been there long before that night. I just hadn't wanted to see it. That evening, Elise came home early. Her mood was strange, light, almost nervous. She said she'd canceled her meeting, said she wanted to spend the night together, just us. She poured wine, made dinner, lit candles. The same routine we used to have. She laughed easily, asked about my day, touched my arm like she used to. But it all felt rehearsed, like she was acting in a play we'd already closed the curtain on. At one point, she reached for my hand and smiled softly, said she missed me, said she felt like we'd been distant. And I just looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes searched mine for warmth, for the man she used to know. I let her see what she'd created, that quiet, cold distance where love used to live. I didn't respond. I didn't accuse. I didn't shout. I just withdrew my hand gently and told her I was going to bed early. The silence that followed was heavier than any fight we'd ever had. That was the last night I slept in the same house as her. The next morning, before the sun rose, I left. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a message. I just walked out, suitcase in hand, breath steady, heart silent. There was no satisfaction in it. No triumph. Just a quiet acceptance that some endings don't come with closure. They just happen. Like the last page of a book you didn't realize you'd finished. I checked into a small hotel a few towns over. The kind of place that smelled faintly of dust and rain. For the first few days I barely spoke. I took long walks, stared at the ceiling, and tried to remember how to exist without her orbiting my every thought. She called, dozens of times. Left voicemails asking where I was, if I was okay, if we could talk. I listened to none of them, because I finally understood that no conversation could bring back something that had already died in silence. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for both of you is to stop pretending there's anything left to fix. A week passed before I went back to the house. Not to see her, just to collect the rest of my things. The moment I walked in, I noticed something different. The air was heavier, the walls quieter. She was sitting in the living room, sketchbook on her lap. Her eyes were red, tired. She looked at me like she'd been waiting for days. She started to say something. 1,000 words behind trembling lips, but I raised my hand gently, stopping her. I didn't need to hear her excuses, her regrets, her reasons. I'd already seen the truth, and words couldn't rewrite it. I just told her I was moving out, that I hoped she'd find whatever it was she was looking for. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't chase me, didn't beg. She just nodded slowly, as if she knew this was the only ending that made sense. When I left for the last time, the air outside felt cleaner. The sun was setting, soft gold melting into the horizon. I stood by the car for a while, watching the house fade behind me. That home had once been my world. Now it was just a shell filled with echoes. As I drove away, I didn't look back. Not once. Because some goodbyes don't need words. They only need silence, the kind that settles when you finally stop fighting what you already know. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. It's been 8 months since I left that house. 8 months of waking up in a room that isn't haunted by her perfume. 8 months of learning to live with quiet that doesn't ache. The first few weeks were the hardest. The kind of hard that doesn't come from pain, but from habit. You don't realize how much of your life was built around another person's presence until it's gone. The small things are what break you first. The sound of a second toothbrush falling when you open the cabinet. The empty half of the bed that stays untouched. The silence that fills the kitchen where her laughter used to live. For a while I tried to fill it. I bought new things. Rearranged the furniture in the small apartment I rented. Forced myself to go out, talk to people, pretend to belong somewhere again. But grief, I've learned, doesn't leave when you distract it. It waits. Quietly. Patiently. It waited for me at night, when the world was still and I was alone with my thoughts. And it didn't whisper her name. It whispered mine. It asked who I was now that I wasn't her husband. That question haunted me for months. One night, I walked down to the pier, the one near my apartment, where the sea smells of salt and rain. I sat there for hours, watching the waves fold over themselves. There's something strange about water. It doesn't hold shape. It doesn't resist. It just moves endlessly, effortlessly. And I thought, maybe that's what healing is supposed to be like. Not forgetting, not erasing. Just moving. So I started moving. Little by little. I went back to running in the mornings. Started cooking again. Meals just for me this time. I bought a small sketchbook of my own, even though I can't draw. I filled it with words instead. Thoughts, pieces of days, quiet confessions I'd never say out loud. And with every page, I began to understand something I'd never seen clearly before. Elise wasn't the villain of my story. She was a chapter. One that burned bright and ended hard, but a chapter all the same. The truth is, we'd both stopped trying long before she met someone else. We'd grown comfortable in silence, mistaking routine for love. And when that comfort turned cold, she searched for warmth somewhere else, while I pretended not to notice. It doesn't make her betrayal right, but it makes it real. And sometimes reality is cruel before it's kind. A few weeks ago, I saw her again. I was leaving a cafe, and she was walking in. For a moment, time stopped, like the world had held its breath. She looked different. Not just physically, lighter somehow. Maybe she'd found what she was looking for. She smiled when she saw me. The kind of small, uncertain smile that carries both guilt and peace. We didn't speak. Just nodded. Two people who shared a lifetime once and now shared only silence. And that silence felt enough. Because closure, I've learned, isn't a conversation. It's a quiet understanding that what once was, will never be again. And that's okay. Sometimes I still think about that night at the restaurant. The sound of her laughter behind the partition. The way my world fell apart in complete silence. It used to replay in my head like a punishment. But now it's just a memory. Painful one, yes, but also a necessary one. Because it taught me something that no amount of love or heartbreak ever could. That you can't hold on to someone who's already let go. You can fight for them, beg for them, forgive them. But if they've already walked away inside their heart, there's nothing left to save. And that's the truth most people don't want to face. We think love is proof of forever. But sometimes, it's just proof that we were brave enough to feel something deeply, even if it didn't last. I've stopped trying to rewrite what happened. Stopped asking what I could have done differently. Stopped blaming her for the way our story ended. Because maybe it had to. Maybe it was meant to end exactly where it did. In that restaurant, behind that partition, with me standing there realizing that love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means leaving quietly without anger, without revenge. And maybe that's the kind of strength that doesn't get talked about enough. Not the strength to fight, but the strength to walk away from what's killing you softly. A few nights ago, I went to a small restaurant near the sea. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet place where people come to sit alone without feeling lonely. The waiter placed a candle on the table. The flame flickered against the glass, soft and unsteady. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't think of her. I just watched the light, and I realized that I was okay. Not healed completely, not fixed, but okay. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop needing closure from the person who broke you. When you understand that not every story needs to end with forgiveness or explanation. Some just end quietly, with the sound of your own breathing reminding you that you're still here. And that's enough. I paid the bill, stepped outside, and felt the cool night air brush against my face. The city lights blurred in the distance, and I stood there for a long time, breathing, watching, existing. I thought of everything that had led me here. The love, the betrayal, the silence, the leaving. And for the first time, none of it hurt anymore. It just was life in all its messy, unplanned, human imperfection. And maybe that's what it's all about in the end. Learning to live with what's left when the storm passes. Not rebuilding the same life, but building something quieter, truer, softer. Something that's yours. That night, before I went to bed, I wrote one last line in my notebook. Just 6 words. Words that summed up everything I had learned about love, loss, and letting go. Sometimes silence is the loudest goodbye. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without dreaming.